We're going to go straight on because he got a golden buzzer from Simon Cowell in his audition and then another one from Amanda Holden during Saturday night's semi-finals, which means that singer Matty J is heading to the Britain's Got Talent final.
He walked onto the stage of Britain's Got Talent in a borrowed suit, carrying 10 years of being told no. Then he opened his mouth, sang one Prince song, and turned a Saturday night audition into the loudest moment of the season. But the story behind that golden buzzer is darker, stranger, and far more interesting than the 4 minutes you saw on television. This is what really happened to Matty Genosa the night the confetti fell. On the 28th of March, 2026, a 27-year-old Filipino singer stepped onto the stage of Britain's Got Talent and changed his entire life in under 5 minutes. The audience did not know his name when he walked out. Simon Cowell did not know his name. Amanda Holden, Alicia Dixon, and Bruno Tonioli were sitting behind their desks, expecting another nervous hopeful with a karaoke dream and a story about their grandmother. What they got instead was a man who had already lost on national television once, who had already buried a music career in the Philippines, who had already spent 2 years carrying plates between voice lessons in Glasgow, and who had quietly chosen the one song in the world that he believed would make Simon Cowell feel something. Before he even sang a note, Matty told the judges the truth. He told them he had spent years thinking he was the kind of person who would always be the loser of every singing competition he ever entered. He said it plainly, the way a man says a thing when he has already made peace with it. The judges smiled politely. They had heard this kind of opening speech 1,000 times. Then the music started, and the room went quiet. And by the second verse of Purple Rain, people in the front rows had started to stand up without realizing they were doing it. By the time he reached the final stretch of the song, where Prince used to lift the entire arena into the rafters with one sustained note, the whole theater was already on its feet. Simon Cowell did not wait for the song to end. He slammed his hand down on the golden buzzer while Matty was still holding the last note, and gold confetti rained down across the stage like a small celebration the entire country had been waiting to throw. Matty stood there frozen, both hands on his head, looking as if he had forgotten how to breathe. He was the first golden buzzer of the entire season, and almost nobody watching at home knew that the song they had just heard him sing was a song he had been preparing to perform for almost a decade. The Boy Who Kept Moving. Long before the confetti fell in London, Matty Genosa was a boy who never stayed in one place for very long. He was born and raised in Quezon City in the Philippines, but his family moved often during his childhood, passing through Mandaluyong, Zamboanga, Taytay, Cavite, and Taguig before he ever reached high school. That last move alone is the kind of detail most stories about him will skip right over, but it matters more than people realize. Taytay sits at the very southern edge of the Philippines, far from the bright lights of Manila, in a region most Filipino performers never set foot in. For a Catholic boy who would one day study musical theater in Scotland, growing up partly in that corner of the country meant his sense of home was already stretched across many different worlds before he was even old enough to write his own songs. Through every move and every new school, the one thing that traveled with him was his voice. He had been singing for anyone who would listen since he was about 5 years old. By the time he reached secondary school at St. Paul College of Makati, music had stopped being a hobby and started becoming an identity. He joined the school choir, known as Musica Polinos, and began entering vocal contests across the city. According to people who knew him during those years, he was the kind of student who could not stop performing even between competitions, putting on small impromptu shows for his classmates in the hallways just to keep the muscle warm. After he graduated from high school, he enrolled, stand on a serious stage in front of a serious audience. He graduated from university in 2018, standing at a crossroads like so many others, safe path or uncertain dream. That was the moment he chose differently. He decided to chase music with everything he had, fully, relentlessly. Within a year, that decision carried him to the audition stage of the very first season of Idol Philippines. Standing there, facing the judges, heart racing, he wasn't just performing. He was proving something. A dream he had carried since he was 5 years old was no longer just a childhood wish. It was real, fragile, and finally within reach. Every note, every second on that stage carried years of doubt, hope, and quiet belief. This wasn't just an audition. It was the beginning of everything he had been waiting for. At that time, he had no idea that the same dream was about to publicly humiliate him in front of an entire country. The First to Fall. The first season of Idol Philippines aired in 2019 on a major Philippine network, and the panel of judges included some of the biggest names in the country's music industry, including the legendary Regine Velasquez and the chart-topping balladeer Maura Della Torre. Thousands of singers turned up to audition across the country, and only 69 of them received a golden ticket to advance past the audition rounds. Maddie was one of those 69. Maddie was one of those 69. At 20 years old, fresh out of university, freshly slimmed down from a difficult few years he was still trying to forget, he walked into that competition believing this was finally going to be his moment. He made it all the way to the top 12 live shows. For the first live round, every finalist had to perform a song by the legendary Filipino composer Ryan Cayabyab, who personally mentored each of the contestants ahead of the broadcast. The scoring system on that show was split evenly between the judges and the public, which meant your popularity at home mattered just as much as how well you sang. And Maddie, despite everything he had built up to that point, was not yet a household name. He had no fan army, no viral clip from his audition, no built-in audience to vote for him week after week. When the results of the first elimination came in, Maddie received 50.5% of the combined score, which was the lowest of anyone in the entire top 12. He and one other contestant were sent home that very night. Zephany Di Chaves, who would eventually win the whole competition, watched him pack his things and leave. In an interview after the elimination, Maddie was honest about the experience. He admitted that his personality and his style had not always translated well on television, but he also said he had no regrets about how he had performed or how he had carried himself. What he did not say out loud, but what was clearly written across his face in every clip from that night, was that he genuinely believed his shot at a music career had just ended. He could not have known that the most unusual chapter of his career was about to begin in the most unexpected place. The trio that soundtracked a Drag Race finale. Within weeks of his elimination, the same network that had sent him home decided to bring him back. The producers paired him with two other finalists from the same season, including the runner-up Lucas Garcia and another top 20 contestant named Enzo, and the three of them formed an all-male vocal trio called Idols. For a young performer who had just been voted off live national television, this was a second chance most people in his position never get. The group started appearing on Filipino variety shows, performing covers, building a small but loyal fan base, and slowly turning into something that looked almost like a real career. In 2020, all three members released solo singles at the same time under the same major Filipino music label. Maddie's track was called Sayo Na Talaga, and it told the story of someone who had been quietly in love with another person for a very long time. It was his first real moment as a recording artist with his own name on the cover, and for a singer who had spent the previous year being told he was the worst of the top 12, the feeling of releasing something that was entirely his own was something he has described as life-changing. The group kept performing across television, including appearances on the Filipino editions of It's Showtime and Your Face Sounds Familiar, where the three of them performed together as a tribute to the rock supergroup featuring Bryan Adams, Rod Stewart, and Sting. In 2021, the group released a single called Kapangarahan, which became one of their most recognized songs. And here is the detail almost nobody outside the Philippines knows about. That song, the one Maddie recorded with two friends after being eliminated first from Idol Philippines, was later chosen as the final lip-sync track for the second season finale of Drag Race Philippines, which is one of the most watched drag competition shows in the whole of Southeast Asia. Maddie's voice, the same voice that had received the lowest score in the top 12 just 2 years earlier, ended up scoring the climactic moment of an entire continent's queer pop culture landmark. And just as Idols was finally hitting its stride, Maddie quietly told his bandmates he was leaving. A one-way ticket to the rain. In 2022, after roughly 3 years together, the group Idols announced that they were officially disbanding. The reason given was simple and unusual. Maddie had been offered a partial scholarship by the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland to study for a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in musical theatre, and he was leaving the Philippines to take it. To his fans, the decision felt almost reckless. He was walking away from a working music career, a major label deal, a national television presence, and a country where people were finally starting to recognize his name. To Maddie, it felt like the only choice that made any kind of sense. He has said in interviews that he had spent years feeling like he was always going to be the loser of every singing competition he ever entered, and the only way to silence that voice in his head was to start completely from scratch, in a country where nobody knew his name, in a program that would force him to become something more than just a singer. He landed in Glasgow with a half-funded scholarship and a list of expenses he could not yet afford. To stay afloat, he took a part-time job as a waiter, juggling shifts in a restaurant kitchen with full days of acting class, dance training, vocal coaching, and rehearsals at the conservatoire. In one of his more honest interviews from that period, he described his first year in Scotland as the hardest and most fulfilling year he had ever lived through, in the same breath. The cold was new. The accent was new. The food was new. The loneliness of being the only Filipino in most of his classes was new. And underneath all of it, the constant pressure of knowing that if he failed out of the program, he would have nothing to go back to. He kept going. He took on every theater role the school would let him audition for. By the time he graduated in 2024, he had performed at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, taken on roles in major musicals including Kinky Boots and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and built a real body of stage work that most graduates of his program spend years trying to assemble. And then, with his diploma in his hand and his student visa quietly running down, he went right back to waiting tables. Because that is what most musical theater graduates actually do. Somewhere between his graduation in 2024 and the audition tape he eventually submitted to Britain's Got Talent, Maddie Genosa stopped thinking like a contestant and started thinking like a strategist. He has said in his own words that when he decided to audition for the show, he did not go in blindly. He sat down and studied Simon Cowell. He watched hours of footage of Simon judging on other competition formats, including American Idol, trying to understand what kind of vocal performance actually moved him. He paid attention to which songs Simon had publicly named as favorites over the years. And then he made a deliberate choice. He picked Purple Rain by Prince, specifically because he had learned that it was one of Simon Cowell's favorite songs of all time. This was not a random pick. This was a singer who had been eliminated first on national television in his home country, who had spent 4 years rebuilding himself in a city where it rained 200 days a year, who had carried plates for 2 years after graduating from a top conservatoire, and who had decided that if he was going to get one more chance at a televised stage, he was going to weaponize every single thing he had learned about the man holding the buzzer. When the audition aired on the 28th of March, 2026, Maddie did exactly what he had planned to do. He held back through the first half of the song, keeping his voice quiet and almost broken, the way Prince used to in the original studio recording. Then in the final stretch, he opened up. The audience rose mid-performance. By the time the last note landed, all 4 judges were on their feet. And Simon Cowell, who had walked into that audition with no idea that the song was being performed specifically for him, hit the golden buzzer and sent the first act of the entire season straight through to the live semifinals. What Maddie did next, however, would surprise even the people who had been rooting for him from the very beginning. The voice that traveled home. Within hours of the audition airing, the clip began traveling in places nobody at Britain's Got Talent had planned for. Filipino news sites picked up the story almost immediately. Filipino fans who had voted him off Idol Philippines 6 years earlier were now reposting his audition with apologies attached. Old fans of Idols began sharing side-by-side videos of him singing with Lucas and Enzo back in 2021, next to the moment Simon Cowell hit the golden buzzer in 2026. The Drag Race Philippines audience, who had grown up to the sound of Kapangarian playing in a finale lip sync, started piecing together that the man on the British stage was the same voice that had soundtracked one of their favorite cultural moments. Across nursing wards and construction sites and call centers in every country with a Filipino diaspora, the audition spread through WhatsApp groups faster than most British viewers will ever fully understand. The semifinals were set to begin in late April 2026, and Maddie has already said that he is preparing a very different kind of performance for that next round. He is stepping away from the soft, broken emotional tone that defined his audition and planning something with a stronger sound and a wider blend of styles, designed to prove that the golden buzzer was not an accident. The pressure on him is enormous. First Golden Buzzer acts almost always carry the highest expectations of any contestant in a season, and the British audience is famously quick to turn on performers who peak in their first appearance. But the deeper truth of Maddie's story is this: none of it is new to him. He has already lived through the kind of setbacks that end most careers before they even begin. First eliminated on national television, a record deal that slipped away, walking away from a country, a label, and a trio that once felt like everything. Starting over didn't scare him anymore. It became his pattern. The boy from Quezon City just kept moving. At his lowest, he carried 240 pounds, both physically and emotionally. He ranked last among the top 12 on Idol Philippines. After graduating from one of the best conservatories in the world, he spent 2 years carrying plates, far from the life he had imagined. But he never stopped rebuilding his body, his voice, his confidence, his identity. Again and again. And now, for the first time, he's standing still long enough for the world to finally catch up. So now, there's only one question left. How far is he willing to go? So what do you think happens next for Maddie Genosa once those live semifinals begin? Drop your prediction in the comments below, and let us know if you